In 65 AD, the Roman Emperor Nero tried to assassinate one of the wealthiest men in his entire empire.
Right, which is a wild piece of history to start with.
It really is.
Yep.
And, the assassins failed. But they didn't fail because the target was surrounded by all these armed guards.
Mm.
And it wasn't because he had some brilliant escape plan either. They failed because this billionaire was basically eating like a peasant.
Yeah, his diet was just so simplified.
Exactly. It was radically stripped down. The assassins literally could not find an opportunity to slip poison into his food.
Which is incredible. I mean, it completely flips our entire understanding of security upside down.
Right.
We spend our whole lives trying to build these impenetrable fortresses around ourselves when the actual solution might be learning how to stand out in the open without panicking.
Yeah, and that is exactly the core mission we are tackling for you today. We're exploring how to navigate an unpredictable, chaotic world without losing your mind, your core values, or your sense of presence.
And we have a seriously fascinating stack of daily notes and reflections to help us do it.
We really do. Everything is centered around the date, June 19th, and the material spans quite a spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
We're looking at modern strategists like Seth Godin and Simon Sinek,
Oh, yeah.
plus ancient philosophers like Seneca and Marcus Aurelius, and literary giants like James Baldwin and Maya Angelou.
It's a great mix.
It is. Oh, and I have to point out the visual shift on your side of the screen. When we started, your digital backdrop was this little spinning mini golf windmill.
Yeah.
And now it has smoothly shifted into this sprawling, bustling, chaotic cityscape. It visually nails the transition we have to make in our own heads. Okay, let's unpack this. Where does a putt-putt windmill fit into navigating a chaotic world?
Great. So the miniature golf windmill is a concept from Seth Godin's book, This is Strategy, and it serves as a perfect metaphor for the kind of problems we fundamentally wish we had.
Meaning what, exactly?
Well, a putt-putt windmill is an entirely closed, predictable system. The blades turn at a fixed, knowable speed. The environment doesn't suddenly change on you. The entire challenge is simply timing. You observe the pattern, you wait for the gap, and, you take your shot.
Right. And if you miss, it's just a localized failure of your own timing. It's not a systemic betrayal by the windmill.
Exactly.
Because in a closed system, the rules are ironclad. Which actually makes me think of chess. Chess scales up the difficulty from a windmill because now you have an opponent.
Right, you have you do this, then they do that dynamic.
Yeah, but the board never changes sizes. A third player doesn't randomly run onto the field, and the knight doesn't suddenly decide it wants to move diagonally.
No, it doesn't. And that structural boundary is exactly what makes chess solvable. But Godin points out that real life is neither a windmill nor a chessboard.
God, wouldn't it be nice if it was?
It really would. But he compares real life to a massive game of rugby, just multiplied over and over again. You have hundreds of competitors, institutions, technologies, entire economic systems all entwined over time.
Wow.
And the players on a rugby field can't rely on rigid, repetitive set plays. The environment is constantly shifting beneath their feet. It requires this mix of practice movement and total improvisation.
It's like expecting your morning commute to be an empty country road, but you end up in Friday rush hour during a massive blizzard. We just get so frustrated because we planned for the windmill.
What's fascinating here is the psychological mechanism behind why we crave that windmill so desperately.
Okay, lay it on me.
Well, the human brain is an energy-conserving organ. It loves linear causality, like A causes B, because it requires very little cognitive load.
It makes a lot of sense.
Right. But when we are forced to navigate a complex adaptive system, like Godin's rugby field, our cognitive load just spikes. We constantly suffer because we keep applying linear putt-putt logic to a non-linear dynamic system.
We want the cheat code.
Exactly. We desperately want a solvable problem with a fixed rhythm because that illusion of control chemically alleviates the crushing anxiety of an unpredictable world.
Which explains the overwhelm. I mean, if our brains are wired to seek out the simple timing of a windmill, being dropped into a chaotic system with a million moving parts just feels completely paralyzing.
Oh, for sure.
So, if we accept that life is the rugby field, how do we keep our nervous systems from just shutting down under the sheer scale of the chaos?
The solution actually runs entirely counter to our natural instincts. When we feel overwhelmed by a complex system, our instinct is to zoom out.
Right, like getting a bird's eye view.
Yeah, we try to elevate our perspective to take in the entire field at once.
Yeah.
Gaming out every single variable and forecasting every possible way the future could go wrong.
Which sounds Incredibly exhausting.
It is.
Hmm?
And that panoramic view is what causes the paralysis. Marcus Aurelius warns specifically against this cognitive trap. He wrote that you must never let your reflection on the whole sweep of life crush you.
Mm.
You cannot fill your mind with the infinite catalog of bad things that might still happen. The mandate is to focus exclusively on the present situation.
There is a line in the notes from Chuck Palahniuk's novel Lullaby that illustrates the mechanics of this perfectly.
Oh, I love this one.
Yeah, a character says, the trick to forgetting the big picture is to look at everything close up. Like if you are a tightrope walker, looking down at the massive drop below you actually activates your amygdala.
Right, it triggers a fear response that ruins your balance.
Exactly. So you look solely at the 3 inches of wire directly in front of your foot. It's the same mechanism for an undefeated sports team.
Oh yeah, they don't look at the streak.
No. Looking at the historic weight of the winning streak creates immense pressure, so they just obsess over the mechanics of the very next play.
Because by radically narrowing your focus, you are managing your cognitive load. You just put one foot in front of the other, and you let the overwhelming variables fade into the background.
Right.
Ryan Holiday applies this concept in The Daily Dad when he talks about the pursuit of stillness. He references an observation from Herman Melville, who noted that all profound things are preceded and attended by silence.
Okay, but applying the concept of profound silence to early parenthood feels like a dark joke. I mean, parenthood is mostly defined by sleep deprivation, sticky surfaces, and the sheer terror of stepping on a stray Lego brick in the dark.
It really is dark joke. But Holiday doesn't sugarcoat the reality of that chaos. His core argument is that stillness cannot be a destination you escape to.
Okay.
If you are surviving the rugby match of life by holding your breath and counting down the days to a 2-week vacation, you are going to drown. Stillness has to be found inside the chaos.
So like in the little moments.
Exactly. It is the 5 quiet minutes sitting in the kitchen after the kids are finally asleep. It is the slow, deliberate walk from the car to the front door, rather than rushing through that space while scrolling through work emails. You have to manufacture those micro moments of silence.
Wait, isn't narrowing our focus just a form of evasion? Aren't we just sticking our heads in the sand to ignore the big, scary problems?
I get why you'd ask that. It is a common critique, but it fundamentally misunderstands how complex systems operate. Narrowing your focus is not evasion, it is tactical positioning.
Tactical position. Okay, how so?
Well, in a system that is genuinely too complex to fully map out, presence is literally the only vantage point from inside the chaos that actually allows you to act. If you try to process the entire rugby field simultaneously, your brain freezes and you get run over. By focusing close up on the immediate next step, you retain your agency. You give yourself the actual capacity to move.
I see. But navigating by focusing on the immediate next step only works if you are entirely honest about what is sitting right in front of you. And honestly, observing reality requires stripping away the filter of your own ego.
And human beings are notoriously terrible at objective observation.
Yeah, we really are.
Because our egos constantly distort the data to favor what we want to be true. There is a profound parable in Anthony DeMello's book, 1 Minute Wisdom, that addresses this exact cognitive distortion.
Oh, right, the one about the seeker.
Yes. A seeker approaches a master and claims he is desperately chasing truth. The master asks what one specific tool he needs above all else to find it. The seeker guesses that he needs an overwhelming passion for the truth.
Which sounds incredibly noble. It is exactly what you would expect a dedicated student to say.
Right. But the master immediately rejects it. He tells the seeker that passion is useless here. What he actually needs is an unremitting readiness to admit he may be wrong.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because the mechanism in that spiritual parable maps flawlessly onto the hyper-practical job hunting advice from Kevin Kelly in our note.
Oh, that's such a great connection.
Yeah. Kelly advises that when you are looking for a job, you cannot operate as a person who desperately needs a job. If you show up radiating your own needs, you're simply presenting a new problem to a boss who already has too many.
Yeah, you're just adding to their cognitive load.
Exactly. Instead, Kelly says, you must humbly think like the person you intend to serve. You have to observe the landscape closely enough to solve the problems that boss already has. Both the spiritual seeker and the job hunter are required to dismantle their egos. They have to stop obsessing over what they want and start observing what the reality of the situation actually demands.
It is the exact same mechanism of humility. Simon Sinek frames this in a daily leadership context, too. He notes that the pressure to pretend we have all the answers is entirely self-imposed.
Yeah, we do it to ourselves.
We really do. When we drop the facade of omniscience, people are remarkably willing to help us. But that collaboration is only unlocked by the vulnerability of admitting we don't know the way forward.
But when people refuse to adopt that vulnerability, the results are catastrophic.
They are. If we connect this to the bigger picture, we see the dark inversion of humility in James Baldwin's societal warning. Baldwin wrote, "Ignorance allied with power is the most ferocious enemy justice can have."
Because confidence untethered from a readiness to be corrected is not a neutral trait.
No, it is actively destructive. I mean, the seeker in Demella's parable only risked his own enlightenment. But when absolute certainty and an inability to admit fault are handed institutional power, that lack of humility curdles.
It turns into something completely different.
Exactly. It creates systems that refuse to adapt, refuse to hear feedback, and ultimately crush the people caught underneath them. Baldwin is pointing out that ignorance alone is just a blind spot. Ignorance weaponized by power is a ferocious engine of injustice.
Understanding that dynamic brings us to a critical pivot in the material. Acknowledging our own capacity to be wrong and radically narrowing our focus to the present moment, those are vital cognitive preparations. But eventually, internal stillness and intellectual humility have to translate into external action.
Because a philosophy that remains trapped in the mind is essentially useless.
Right.
And the transition from conviction to deed is historically one of the hardest gaps for humanity to cross. The daily Stoic reflection on Juneteenth isolates this exact phenomenon.
The notes highlight a staggering historical timeline regarding that delay of action. The historical fact is that Union troops finally arrived in Texas to enforce the emancipation of enslaved people a full 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation was issued. And furthermore, this enforcement occurred nearly 90 years after the Declaration of Independence articulated the foundational belief that all men are created equal.
It is a stark, measurable example of the sheer friction involved in moving from a stated value to an enforced reality.
Yeah.
The notes draw a parallel to the American founders themselves. Many of them possessed brilliant philosophical minds and wrote extensively about the natural rights of humanity, yet they lived within and benefited from a societal structure that violently contradicted those writings for nearly a century.
We see that same jarring compartmentalization in Marcus Aurelius.
We really do. Aurelius wrote eloquently about the Stoic ideal of a society governed by equal laws, where rulers respect the liberty of their subjects above all else. Yet, as emperor, he presided over a vast slave society and implemented virtually no structural changes to dismantle it. To his credit, he seemed somewhat aware of this psychological failing. He wrote in his Meditations that a person can commit an injustice by doing nothing just as easily as by actively doing harm.
Theodore Roosevelt offered a brutal summary of this human tendency in 1910. He stated that words count for nothing except insofar as they represent acts, acta non verba, deeds, not words. But the gap between what we know is right and what we actually do is terrifying. How do you and I avoid the trap Marcus Aurelius fell into? It's so easy today to read a self-help book, say the right thing online, and feel like we've accomplished something without actually doing anything in the real world.
This raises an important question because it forces us to evaluate the actual utility of presence. Convictions are meaningless if they function only as well-phrased hopes. Cultivating stillness, practicing humility, seeing the reality of the rugby field clearly, all of these are just the locker room warm-up. Taking the shot when the gap in the windmill finally opens, actually stepping into the friction of the real world and executing the deed is the only metric that matters.
But taking that shot requires resources, which brings us to the two concepts we use most frequently as excuses not to act: money and time. And our sources suggest that our foundational relationship with both of these resources is completely backward.
Yeah, we can look at the mechanism of wealth first. Ryan Holiday points out a tragic irony in how humans pursue money. The initial impulse is usually a desire for freedom. We seek wealth to buy optionality, the ability to say no, to take risks, and to live on our own terms. But the psychological reality is that once the wealth is acquired, the fear of losing it takes over.
It flips.
Totally. The wealth stops being a tool for freedom and becomes a fragile fortress that requires constant defense. The individual basically becomes a prisoner to the very security they were trying to build.
Seneca understood the neurobiology of this trap 2,000 years ago. As an advisor to Nero, Seneca was astonishingly wealthy. But he realized that the fear of losing his status was compromising his agency.
Yeah.
So he utilized what we would now call exposure therapy. He practiced intentional poverty. He would spend days dressing in coarse rags and eating the cheapest, plainest food available, specifically to rewire his brain's fear response. He would sit in that manufactured discomfort and ask himself, is this the condition I feared?
Because by physically tasting the worst-case scenario, he mathematically diminished its power over him. It reset his psychological baseline.
Right.
And it led to that incredible historical irony you mentioned in the intro. When Nero eventually grew paranoid and attempted to have Seneca poisoned, the assassins found it nearly impossible. Seneca's diet was so fundamentally stripped down to raw, basic elements that there was simply no elaborate meal or rich wine to hide the poison in.
The mechanism of fear setting literally saved his life. But Seneca's broader point was that financial security is a psychological state, not a numerical threshold.
Yes, having enough is the actual finish line. But our culture treats security as a brief station you pass through on the endless acceleration toward more.
Always more.
Always. Recognizing when you have enough requires active daily discipline because the default state of the human ego is infinite accumulation.
Seneca applied that exact same disciplined perspective to how we process time. Both he and Maya Angelou framed time as an unalterable, immaterial object. You cannot speed it up, you cannot slow it down, and you cannot bank it for later.
No, you really can't.
Seneca argued that the human lifespan isn't inherently short. We simply squander the vast majority of it on things that don't matter.
Leonardo da Vinci synthesized this perfectly, observing that just as a well-spent day brings happy sleep, a life well used brings a happy death. The anxiety we feel about time running out is usually a misdirected symptom of our own failure to use the present moment effectively.
There's a practical rule in the notes from Dorothy Sarnoff regarding public speaking that captures the mechanics of this perfectly. She advises speakers to always make sure they have finished speaking before their audience has finished listening.
That's brilliant.
So what does this all mean? If you extract that rule from the context of a podium and apply it to daily human interaction, it becomes a profound act of empathy. It requires you to treat other people's attention and their time as a sacred, strictly non-renewable resource. You don't waste their time with your ego because time is the one physical currency you can never refund to them.
Wow. That reframing changes the stakes of every interaction. Ryan Holiday delivers a blunt warning regarding this dynamic, noting that moral failures don't just threaten some abstract future judgment.
Right.
Sin makes this life hell right now, not just later. Today's stakes matter today. Navigating time and navigating wealth require the identical discipline of recognizing enough and executing on it today.
We cannot control the massive overlapping variables of the rugby field. We cannot force the universe to behave like a predictable putt-putt windmill.
No, we have zero control over the external variables. To synthesize all the threads from these notes, there is a final quote from the Buddha that anchors the entire philosophy. It is better to conquer yourself than to win 1,000 battles. Self-mastery is genuinely the only contest available to us. We cannot out-strategize the entire chaotic field.
The only thing we can conquer is the agonizing gap between what we know we should do and what we actually execute in the physical world.
And when you close that gap, you realize that caring for others and caring for yourself are not two competing priorities. They are the exact same discipline of presence, just turned outward and inward simultaneously.
That clarity is what allows you to act. And that leaves us with one final thought for you to mull over as you navigate the rest of your well-spent day. If recognizing enough is a discipline we have to practice, what is one specific area of your life where you have already won, but you are still exhausting yourself playing the game because you simply forgot to declare victory? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We will see you next time.